A baby was sleeping soundly and safely in one of the rooms. Meanwhile, in another room, a man and a woman were engaged in their daily gaming session together. During the session, the woman remarked that she needed to stop exercising because she had heard the baby's voice and felt the need to check on him. She repeated that she had to go and see what was happening. The man, mid-training, suddenly became aware of the situation. He questioned whether it was truly appropriate to continue working out in the middle of the day with a married woman who also had a child. He began to wonder if he was really ready to continue with this arrangement. His thoughts drifted to the events that had happened 2 days earlier. 2 days ago, he had been working as a construction laborer for Sambo Construction. While he was on site, he received a video call from his girlfriend. Due to the loud noises at the construction site, he told her that he couldn't hear her properly and asked if she could speak louder. On the call, she started screaming, announcing that she was breaking up with him. Holding the phone in disbelief, he asked her what she was talking about so suddenly. She expressed her frustration, saying she was sick of him, sick of living in a smelly basement, and sick of not being able to go on vacation because he was always broke. Her voice was filled with rage as she shouted that she couldn't believe she had even considered marrying him and that her proposal had been a drunken joke. Looking at his phone, stunned and hesitant, he tried to reason with her, reminding her that she had once told him he was the only one for her. But she coldly clarified that he shouldn't get the wrong idea that she was already seeing someone else. That revelation left him completely blank. She told him she had finally found a decent guy, someone who made a lot of money. She called him by the name Go Hoon-sang and told him she could finally dump him for the other man. On the verge of tears, he asked her if she was being serious. She confirmed it and sarcastically questioned how she had wasted 5 years with him, implying that it was only his strong physique that kept her around. She added that she didn't even know how she had waited during his military service and swore she would have to lose her mind to ever call him again. With that, she hung up. He screamed into the phone, begging her to hold on, but the call had ended. Tears began to fall as he broke down, whispering to himself whether this was really happening and admitting that she was right about everything. As he resumed his labor on the construction site, his thoughts were consumed with despair. He believed he had nothing to offer besides his strong body and wondered how he could ever take care of a woman. He convinced himself that no woman could ever plan a future with a man like him, someone broke and living hand to mouth. While he was carrying heavy materials, a car suddenly arrived at the construction site. Recognizing the car, he muttered that it belonged to the vice president and wondered what he was doing there. Co-workers around him murmured that the vice president must have come because they were behind schedule. One worker said they should hurry over before he got mad. Another remarked that the vice president was going to be furious. As the workers speculated about the situation, they noted that he must have been informed about last week's delay and were surprised that he had come in person to the site. Hoon-sang stood there silently, listening to their conversations, while his eyes remained fixed on the vice president. He thought to himself that they appeared to be around the same age. The vice president, being the grandson of Sambo Construction's CEO, had assumed the role at a remarkably young age. Rumors swirled that he was even dating a famous actress. Hoon-sang reflected bitterly that, in contrast, he had just been dumped because of his poverty and inability to even pay rent on time. The vice president, he thought, must never have known hunger and was likely surrounded by people. He wondered if he could be reborn as someone like him. He could surely live an extraordinary life. As he continued staring, the vice president seemed to notice him. Hoon-sang questioned internally whether the vice president was really looking at him. The vice president approached him and commented that he looked like someone who could take a beating. He confirmed that they had outsourced some tasks to him and then offered him 50,000 won per hit. The offer shocked Hoon-sang, but the vice president turned to his assistant, Mr. Kong, and instructed him to follow. Mr. Kong responded affirmatively. They led Hoon-sang into a separate room and began to physically assault him. After delivering 3 blows, the vice president scoffed, saying that Hoon-sang was weaker than he appeared, and that he had barely used any strength. He accused Hoon-sang of going easy because he had already made his daily wage. In response, Hoon-sang shouted that he could take more and pleaded with the vice president to hit him harder. Impressed by his endurance, the vice president exclaimed that he liked this kind of spirit. He turned to Mr. Kong and urged him to develop a similar strength. He then asked the site manager when the construction work would be completed. The manager cautiously replied that it would take 4 months. The vice president exploded with rage, accusing him of giving an even worse answer than the laborers. He shouted that 3 months was already too long and questioned whether the manager thought he could negotiate with him. Panic set in as the construction manager tried to explain, but the vice president cut him off, yelling about how many investors had already threatened to pull their funding if they were even a day late. He berated everyone for their inability to meet deadlines. Suddenly, in his fury, he attempted to strike Hwasama with a rod, screaming that he would kill him. Just then, the construction manager intervened, desperately promising that they could meet the deadline if only they were granted 1 more month. The vice president pulled out a bundle of cash from his wallet and threw it in Hwasama's face. Turning to the site manager, he instructed him to prepare additional funds for hiring new workers to cover weekend shifts, adding that the same payment adjustments should be made for those already employed. The construction manager responded promptly, assuring him with a, "Yes, sir." Hwasama sat there, stunned, as piles of money lay scattered before him. The vice president, looking over his shoulder, emphasized that safety was of utmost importance. He warned that if construction were delayed due to an accident, every single person would be fired. He told them to work quickly and safely, adding that they knew how things operated. After delivering his final warning, the vice president left the construction site. Afterward, Hwasama went to the shower, reflecting on how, just moments ago, he had been handed a large amount of cash by the vice president himself. As he stared at his reflection in the mirror, he noticed another man standing beside him. That man commented almost knowingly that Hwasama had an incredibly strong body and that, if he was born with it, he ought to use it to earn his living. Hwasama was taken aback by the remark. The man continued, expressing surprise that someone like Hwasama was doing rough, labor-intensive jobs such as construction work. Feeling defensive, Hwasama asked if the man was implying that he should sell his body, calling the idea ridiculous. The man responded bluntly, saying that no one cared about men like them who did such physically demanding jobs. He explained that heavy labor brought in little money, and that they had to earn as much as they could while their bodies were still young. According to him, even wealthy men didn't possess what Hwasama had, the physical strength that couldn't be bought with money. He stressed again that a body like Hwasama's wasn't something one could acquire with wealth alone. Growing increasingly agitated, Hwasama expressed his frustration. Later that night, he sat alone at a convenience store, eating instant noodles for dinner. His thoughts drifted to his father, recalling what the man used to say often, that his son's body would one day be worth a lot of money. His father, a construction worker himself, had suffered a traumatic brain injury from an industrial accident. The meager compensation he received barely prolonged his life, and eventually, he passed away without anyone truly caring. That same father had forced his young high school-age son to follow the same difficult path. Hwasama realized then that poverty was something that was handed down from one generation to the next, and that breaking free from its grip was almost impossible. But the one thing his father had passed down to him, his strong, capable body, was something that even the wealthy could never attain, not even in death. He began to wonder if he couldn't use that gift to escape this life and build a better future for himself. As he sat quietly, still eating dinner, the man he had encountered earlier at the shower appeared outside the convenience store with 2 girls. One of the girls held a camera and snapped a picture of Hwasama, commenting mockingly that he looked a little stupid. Standing behind them, the man pointed out that Hwasama was the one he had spoken about. The girl handed the man a deposit of 300,000 won. The man remarked that Hwasama's body was about the size of President Joe's forearm. Joe, holding the camera, responded that she would pay more once she had seen him in person and urged the man to try his best to recruit him. She stated that a gemstone only became a jewel after being cut and polished. Meanwhile, Hwasama remained unaware of the exchange taking place outside. The girl turned to another girl beside her and called her by name Yuna, telling her to get ready. Yuna answered with a casual okay. Shortly after, Hwasama stepped out of the convenience store. As he walked down the street, he reflected once again on his life, wondering what he was doing. He questioned whether there was truly anything more for a man like him who merely did manual labor until the day he died. Lost in thought, he was suddenly startled when someone appeared behind him. It was Yuna. He apologized immediately, not realizing he had bumped into her. Yuna reassured him that it was fine and walked away. As she disappeared into the distance, he found himself thinking that she was remarkably beautiful. But then, something caught his attention. He looked down at his hand and realized he was holding a card. It read, "If you need money, call me." He stood there, shocked, as it dawned on him that the girl must have slipped the card into his hand before walking away. Confused and curious, he began to wonder what exactly was going on. That night, he returned to his house and found himself staring intently at the card the girl had given him. He couldn't take his eyes off it. His thoughts wandered, questioning whether a business card that simply had a phone number and the message telling him to contact if he needed money was a new tactic for exchanging contact details, or merely an elaborate scam. He eventually picked up his phone, hesitating for a moment before dialing the number. He told himself that there was no way to know the truth unless he gave it a try. After dialing, he spoke a greeting into the receiver, but no voice responded from the other end, and the call was abruptly disconnected. Confused, he glanced at his phone screen and was instantly stunned to see a deposit notification indicating that 10 million won had been transferred into his account. Shock swept over him, and he tried to process the situation, murmuring in disbelief about the sheer amount of money. As he started again at the screen, more messages appeared. One message stated that the sender wanted to work together with him and promised an additional 10 million won if he accepted. His mind struggled to grasp what was happening. He questioned the reality of the situation, whether the phone, the bank app, or even the money itself was real. He wondered who could have sent such a large amount, how they knew about him, and more disturbingly, how they had acquired his bank account number. Before he could piece together any answers, another 10 million won appeared in his account. Now completely overwhelmed, he began calculating the possibilities. With 20 million won, he could finally pay off his overdue rent and credit card bills, including the fees from his previous phone. After clearing those debts, he would still have approximately 1.7 million won remaining, enough to cover 1 year of admission fees. Without further delay, he responded to the message with his acceptance. Almost immediately, a link appeared on the screen, accompanied by a message instructing him to come alone at 10 p.m., warning that the phone number would vanish after the promised time. Another message followed shortly, stating that the money now in his possession was his to use however he wished. Later, he went to the retirement house and informed the receptionist that he intended to pay for a 1-year stay. The receptionist reminded him that 2 months of payment had previously been missed and asked whether he wanted to deduct those months from the total year. He declined and told her to include everything. The receptionist, noticing the change in his financial condition, remarked that it seemed he had found a job and added that his mother would be pleased. He then inquired about his mother's condition. The receptionist explained that his mother was doing better than before, slowly becoming more active, and suggested that if he wanted a more accurate update, he could speak to the doctor in charge or visit his mother personally. He agreed, and she guided him to his mother's room, where the older woman sat quietly in a wheelchair. The receptionist approached the woman gently and informed her that her son was there. The woman tried to speak and eventually managed a soft greeting. The receptionist praised her for the effort, noting her progress. After leaving the room, he walked quickly, recalling the doctor's previous assessment. The doctor had pointed out that while his mother's dementia was concerning, her heart problems posed a much more serious threat. She required immediate heart surgery, but for now, she was being given medication to manage her Alzheimer's symptoms. The doctor had emphasized that this medication was straining her heart, worsening her condition. He checked his phone again, only to find that his balance now stood at 6 million won. He realized the money would not be nearly enough. The doctor had suggested that it might be best to stop the current treatment and transfer her to a larger, more advanced hospital. A sense of urgency surged through him as he started running through the crowd, ignoring the annoyed stares of people around him. He kept running, focused only on his thoughts. He reasoned that instead of trying to earn small amounts of money by doing minor jobs, it would be better to take action immediately. He needed to move forward, not delay. Determined, he made his way to meet Yuna. On the way, the doctor's words echoed in his mind, questioning whether he was truly going to let his mother die without even attempting surgery. He thought of Yuna again, remembering how easily she had transferred 20 million won as though it meant nothing to her. That gesture alone suggested she might be capable of giving him even more. Without wasting another moment, he rushed toward the address mentioned in the message. He reached the building, ran inside, and opened the door. The place was filled with people, most of whom appeared to be couples, but he didn't pay them any attention. He pushed past them all and went directly to Yuna. She stood there, composed, and told him that he had arrived at the right time. He didn't waste any words and asked what he needed to do next. Yuna informed him that his role would be to assist various women with their training and help train them during exercise sessions. She also provided him with the address of the house he was to visit the following day. The next day, he arrived at the building and stood in front of the designated apartment. His thoughts were swirling, but he tried to calm himself, deciding that he shouldn't overthink the situation. He reasoned that he simply needed to greet the client and begin the session as professionally as possible. Still, he found himself wondering how exactly to phrase his introduction, whether he should plainly say that he was there for a private training session or try to make it sound more natural. As the door opened, a woman appeared in front of him. He looked at her, momentarily stunned by her appearance, silently acknowledging to himself that she was very attractive. The woman invited him to come inside. As he stepped into the apartment, he greeted her politely and noticed that she was already dressed to play a game attire, seemingly ready for the session. He felt a quiet sense of relief, realizing that she had already prepared for the session and that he wouldn't have to find an awkward way to start. The woman then pointed quietly toward a room and asked him to go in silently, explaining that her baby was sleeping. As he walked into the room, his eyes landed on a framed wedding photo, leading him to conclude that she was married and had a child. Taking in the environment, he acknowledged to himself that this was his first time conducting a training session with a woman who was also a mother. They began the jumping session, and he reminded himself that there was no reason to feel embarrassed. He was not the only one experiencing something new. The woman herself had said that it was her first time working out after her husband's absence. He realized she must be feeling nervous and possibly uncomfortable exercising with a male trainer. He resolved to behave respectfully and carefully to ensure she didn't misunderstand his intentions or feel uneasy. During the session, the woman asked him about his age. He responded that he was 25. She then remarked that he was 2 years younger than her and asked if she could speak to him informally. With that light-hearted exchange, the two of them resumed the training session. As they continued exercising, but the moment was interrupted when the baby, who had been sleeping in the other room, suddenly started crying. Su Woo-jin became visibly concerned and apologized, explaining that her baby had likely woken up. He reassured her that it was fine, though he couldn't help but notice the shift in her tone. It had become noticeably more polite and gentle. She then made a request, asking if he could watch the baby for a short while so she could take a shower. He hesitated, surprised by the sudden responsibility of looking after someone else's child. However, he agreed. She expressed her gratitude and left to take her shower. Left alone with the baby, he approached the child and gently tried to console the little one. He offered a bottle but quickly noticed it was empty. As he was tending to the baby, Su Woo-jin quietly returned from behind. He turned to her and mentioned that the baby might be hungry and was likely looking for her. Then, she asked a question that caught him completely off guard, whether he would like to be her husband for a day. He laughed nervously, unsure of how to respond. She immediately clarified that she was just joking, but then added more sincerely that she would like him to stay by her side, if he was comfortable with that. He smiled and responded without hesitation, letting her know that he was happy to stay. While Su Woo-jin was gently consoling her baby, he stood nearby, lost in thought. A question lingered in his mind. Why had she called him over in the first place, especially when she was already married and had a child? He wondered if she truly needed a man just to act as her husband for a single day, or if there was something deeper behind her request. His thoughts drifted into a flashback, recalling the moment he had been presented in front of the woman who was a friend of Yuna. She had spoken to him sternly, pointing out that appearing nervous in front of a woman didn't give a good impression and questioned whether he could handle the job with that kind of demeanor. He had responded with a respectful tone, assuring her that she could trust him. But she quickly reminded him that this wasn't the military and urged him to loosen up. He nodded, again replying formally. She had then shifted the conversation, continuing from where she had left off. She explained how Banam City, once infamous for its brothels, had become part of a major redevelopment plan. With the completion of the high-speed subway connecting it to Seoul Station, a wave of startups and IT enterprises had flooded into the area. As these businesses flourished, many young working couples began moving into the surrounding neighborhoods. Department stores and branded retail chains, aiming to serve this new population, opened their doors and entered into fierce competition. Well-known cram schools had also taken root, turning Banam City into a vibrant educational hub that even surpassed Daechi City in prestige. It had transformed from a decaying red-light district into a modern, thriving city, arguably the most successful redevelopment project of them all. She had gone on to speak about the nation's highest divorce rate, describing how businessmen would leave their offices only to end up in hotels, while legal battles over child custody and property rights seemed never-ending. Eventually, she handed him a business card, explaining that it would serve as a gateway and a guide for welcoming new customers. She had emphasized that he would become a special offering for VIP clients, someone unforgettable. At that time, he had been left confused, wondering what exactly she meant by calling him a gift. Back in the present, he stood silently beside Su Woojin, who had managed to lull her baby back to sleep. Watching her now, he couldn't help but reflect on the earlier words. Could it be that she saw him as one of those gifts, a special presence in this rejuvenated city? He questioned whether he could truly become something meaningful for others in this place. He remained with her in the apartment until evening, quietly observing her as she moved about her space. He thought about how she had worked out in her own home with a man she had only just met, and yet had grown so comfortable with him in such a short time. He didn't know whether she was simply lonely or perhaps emotionally distant from her marriage. Still, the entire day, she had spent it with another man, and her husband hadn't reached out to her even once. He wondered if her husband even lived with her anymore. Yet, he was certain he had seen their wedding photo earlier. Suddenly, she stirred from her rest and asked if he would like to do another round of cardio session. He responded with some surprise, questioning the suddenness of her request. She reminded him to keep his voice down, as the baby was still sleeping, and insisted that they begin again. He asked if she was sure she was up for it, and she affirmed that they could manage it now. He looked at her with concern, realizing how unusual and unfamiliar this whole situation was for him. Despite the strangeness of it all, they began their second session of exercise together. During the workout, Hoon-sang asked Woojin where her husband was. He clarified that he didn't mean to pry or sound like he cared too much, but he was simply curious about what kind of man would leave behind a woman like her, especially during the night. He added that he genuinely felt bad for whoever that man was. Woojin asked if he had considered that perhaps it might be her fault. Hoon-sang disagreed immediately, saying it was clearly her husband's fault. He pointed out that despite her spending the entire day working out with another man, her husband hadn't even called her once. Woojin explained that her husband was simply busy with work. Hoon-sang asked whether the baby was doing all right and whether she had eaten. Woojin confessed that her husband couldn't even manage to say the simplest words to comfort her or offer to meet, claiming he had no time to rest because he was an executive at his company. Hoon-sang responded bluntly, suggesting that her husband was probably with another woman at a hotel, and she knew it deep down. That, he said, might have been the real reason she had invited Hoon-sang over for a morning burn. Woojin denied that, saying she had simply been feeling unwell. Hoon-sang told her he didn't really care and considered working out with her that day as a simple pleasure. He then questioned what it meant for her and the baby. He couldn't understand how she could defend a husband like that. She said that without her husband, she felt truly alone. Hoon-sang told her she was already alone and guessed that she had probably married young. Now, she might be starting to realize all the experiences she had missed out on, like enjoying intense reps with her partner, or even having time for herself. He suspected that she didn't know how to deal with all the desires she had buried inside. She couldn't suppress the truth anymore. And since her husband was likely seeing another woman as well, perhaps she had started to think she was the problem. Woojin looked distressed, tears filling her eyes, and asked what she was supposed to do. What should she do in order to forget everything? Hoon-sang thought to himself that even if Woojin's husband and he were completely different, He could never bring himself to sleep with her after simply working out together. He questioned what more he could do for a woman like her, who had been left behind so completely. The next day, Sang was sitting at a coffee shop when his phone lit up with a message from a girl named Park Lali, asking if he was available. Without hesitation, he replied that he wasn't and promptly blocked her. Almost immediately, his phone rang. It was a call from his boss, and from the sound of it, Rayleigh seemed quite excited after the conversation. On the following morning, under the bright sun, Sang ran into Woo Jin on the street. She was with her baby, and he called out to her, offering her a bouquet of flowers and congratulating her on the divorce. He commented cheerfully that since she had received a significant settlement, she would be able to manage well on her own. Woo Jin looked bright and said she wanted to work out with him again. Sang was confused by her sudden eagerness. Without much warning, she grabbed his hand and pulled him toward a hotel. Inside, Woo Jin began to open up. Her husband, she confessed, had been cheating on her with a colleague for 2 years. In fact, it was her husband who had been pushing for the divorce. He had been caught red-handed in broad daylight. Elsewhere, Yuna and Joe were discussing Woo Jin's situation. Yuna explained that they had only needed Woo Jin's permission, but she had initially opposed the divorce because she was pregnant at the time. Joe asked if that was why the husband had blackmailed her, threatening to leak his own scandalous photos to the press. Yuna confirmed this and added that Woo Jin's father was the mayor of Banam, a man who had been elected on the promise to double support for marriage and childbirth. If his daughter were to be publicly embroiled in a messy divorce, it would reflect badly on him and also harm the child's future. By allowing the cheating to be hidden, and as long as her husband didn't mind, he had nothing to lose. Joe then shifted topics and asked if Yuna still didn't trust Sang. Yuna admitted that she didn't. He was just a fool, she said. Her friend laughed, saying she had thought the same. Yuna asked what she meant by that. Joe elaborated that, regardless of his approach, Sang had been able to influence Woo Jin, a woman who had refused to change her mind no matter what. She speculated that even if they had sent a real professional, the result might not have been the same. Yuna responded that maybe it wasn't about the method, but the person involved. Joe agreed and noted that Sang might actually have potential in their business, possibly more than they had originally thought. She proposed that he could be shaped into a real asset. With that, she asked Yuna if she could take responsibility for him. Yuna was visibly nervous and asked what she was supposed to do. Her friend, who was also her superior, stated that he would need a manager. Yuna began protesting, questioning why he would even need a manager. Joe assured her that she would be paid double her current salary. Yuna still found it too sudden, but her friend reminded her that there were plenty of others who would gladly take the opportunity if she declined. Reluctantly, Yuna agreed and told her to leave it to her. Meanwhile, Woo Jin and Sang were once again exercising together. During the session, he casually asked if she planned to meet her husband that weekend. Woo Jin shook her head and said she was busy and she would be spending the weekend with her friends instead. Woo Jin had mentioned that it had been 2 days since her divorce, and she hadn't even stepped outside her house during that time. She admitted she had nothing else to do, though one thing still lingered in her mind that bothered her. Sang suggested it might be because they were extremely compatible with each other. Later that night, Sang received a sudden call from his boss. He was visibly shocked by what he heard, and after being told he had to leave immediately, he ended the call without hesitation. Since Woo Jin was asleep, he left a message for her, saying he had gone out without waking her. As he stepped out of the hotel, he reassured himself that she wouldn't be too sad being alone. But just as he exited, a car pulled up in front of him. It was Yuna. She rolled down the window and told him to get in. He called out her name in surprise and climbed into the car. As she drove, he asked where they were going. Yuna, in response, asked how old he was and whether he had a driver's license. He told her he was 25 and didn't have one. Yuna explained that she would be acting as his manager from now on, but she couldn't keep chauffeuring him around everywhere. She instructed him to get a driving license as soon as possible and threw in a remark, questioning what kind of woman would want to spend time with a man who didn't even have a car. He agreed and promised to get one. She then asked him to stop staring at her, clearly irritated, and told him to get his head straight because he was beginning to frustrate her. Embarrassed, he apologized. She pressed again, asking what she had just told him, and he quickly replied that he would try his best. Their car eventually stopped at a golf resort. Yuna noticed that he had dozed off during the ride and shouted at him to get out. As he stepped out, he was stunned by the elegance of the place. The words golf and resort glistened outside the building. Yuna handed him a set of golf equipment. He admitted that he had never played golf in his life, but she brushed him off, saying she was off the clock for the day and wouldn't be answering any more questions. They entered the building in silence. Sang was overwhelmed by the luxury of the resort. He thought to himself that he had never been in a place like that and wondered why they were even there. He quietly followed Yuna, unsure of what to expect. Eventually, they reached a lavish hall, where their boss, Miss Jo, stood waiting. Jo greeted them warmly and remarked that they had finally arrived. She asked Sang how he was doing. He replied that he was doing well. Jo noted that it must be difficult raising children alone, but he mentioned that Wu Jin looked happy now, and he thanked her, suggesting that her help had made a difference. Yuna chimed in, stating that Wu Jin wouldn't have had the courage to take those steps if it hadn't been for Sang. Miss Jo praised him, telling him that he had done a truly good job. Sang found himself admiring her glow. He thought to himself that if he hadn't received that business card, his mother would have already been kicked out of her retirement home. Jo then explained the real reason she had called him there was for an important business matter. To him, she felt more like a savior than just a boss. He also acknowledged that Yuna had been instrumental in his journey. If it weren't for her, he wouldn't have even made that first call. As he looked at Yuna, he felt deeply grateful, thinking that these two women had lifted him out of the depths, and he silently vowed to do his best. Suddenly, Jo snapped at him to focus. She asked if he wanted to go back to working on construction sites. He quickly responded no. She demanded to know whether he thought he was special now. He apologized and said he was listening. Jo raised her voice, telling him that what he was doing wasn't just about comforting lonely women. He was providing a service to VIPs of the town. She asked if he truly believed Wu Jin was just an ordinary single mother. She was, in fact, the only daughter of the mayor of Banam. Hearing this, Sang was stunned and nodded, still processing the information. Jo told him to follow her, saying they had work to do. He agreed and trailed after her. She mentioned that their guest for the day was a little particular. Curious, he asked what she meant. She pointed out a man and told Sang to get ready because he would be teaching that guest some exercises. He was taken aback, asking if she meant right now it was 3 a.m. Jo laughed and said that's exactly why she had called him, then dismissed herself with a quick goodbye. As she left, he shouted after her, protesting that she couldn't just summon him like this. Still, he entered the room and found himself facing the guest he was supposed to train. He began preparing to guide him through the exercises, still wondering to himself if this was the particular guest Jo had mentioned. A girl had joined them for the resistance band session. Once it ended, the man turned to Sang and remarked that he had done an excellent job, then casually asked if he had ever played golf before. Sang replied that he hadn't, not even once. The man responded with mild surprise, saying that in that case, he would need to arrange some lessons for him with an ex-professional. Curious, Sang asked who that professional might be. The man gestured with a nod toward the girl who had participated in the training with them, revealing that it was her. He added that she used to be a professional golf player and mentioned that they were heading out to the field the next morning, instructing Sang to schedule a tea time with Daehai. Sang looked confused upon hearing that. The man stood up, advised them not to stay up too late, and walked away in the direction of Boss Joe's room. As Sang watched him disappear down the hallway, he found himself wondering why the man was heading to the boss's room at this hour. Turning to the girl whose name he now knew was Daehai, Sang recalled what the man had said and suggested that, since they had an early morning, they should probably go to sleep soon, especially considering it was already 2 a.m. Daehai's expression suddenly turned blank. Sensing something off, Sang asked if she also seemed a bit confused at the moment. To that, Daehai responded that she had been the one who called that man. She explained that he was actually a board member of Sambo Construction. The name Sambo Construction immediately struck a chord with Sang, as he had previously done work for them. Daehai went on to say that the board member was currently visiting Ina on a business trip. Surprised by this revelation, Sang asked her if that meant she was the VIP in question. Daehai, in return, asked if the boss hadn't informed him yet. She then introduced herself more formally, stating that her father was the president of Sambo. This revelation left Hoon-sang stunned once again. He realized that not only was her father the president of Sambo, but that she was also the youngest granddaughter of the group's founder and the sister of Sambo's vice president. Essentially, she was none other than the legendary golf goddess Lee Dae-hai. Hoon-sang began to laugh sarcastically, his expression laced with irony. Seeing this, Dae-hai appeared startled and asked what he found so amusing. He replied that he simply couldn't help but laugh. His tone shifted to one of bitterness as he revealed that it was the vice president of Sambo Construction, her brother, who had led him to her. This revelation left Dae-hai visibly surprised. She asked him in disbelief whether her brother had some kind of grudge against him and wondered aloud if Hoon-sang had worked under her brother in the past. Hoon-sang confirmed that he had worked for a company contracted by Sambo. With a bitter chuckle, he pointed out the irony of the situation of a man like him from the lower rungs of the hierarchy ending up in service to someone as privileged and powerful as her. Dae-hai burst out laughing as well, teasing him by saying that he hadn't even technically worked for the company itself but rather as a laborer under Sambo. She then mockingly asked what exactly he expected from her, before pausing and mischievously announcing that she had just changed her mind. She warned that she would devour him over the weekend and have him buried in cement afterward, joking that it would be a shame to waste such an effort to kill him. Tired of the banter, Hoon-sang told her to stop joking around. But Dae-hai leaned in further, her tone suddenly darker. She asked him if he truly believed she was joking. She wondered aloud if it had never occurred to him what might have happened to his predecessors where they had disappeared to perhaps sunk deep in the ocean or hidden away in some uninhabited valley. She continued laughing, her voice echoing with unsettling cheerfulness, and warned that no one would even miss him if he were to vanish and die somewhere. She sarcastically added that perhaps the news might spare a few lines for a paycheck-to-paycheck laborer living in poverty. Hoon-sang looked at her, disturbed, and silently reflected on how twisted the minds of rich people could be. He found himself thinking that both of the siblings were exceptionally skilled at provoking people. Then, in a sudden burst of emotion, Hoon-sang grabbed Dae-hai forcefully. Alarmed, she asked what he was doing. He retorted that she hadn't truly listened to him. If he were destined to die anyway, then he might as well try to take her down with him. He'd destroy her and strip her of every last cent. Worried now, Dae-hai asked him what he was saying. Hoon-sang replied that he had once heard a story about a girl born into wealth who had never received proper attention growing up. He said that this girl had developed neurological issues and had become incapable of functioning without a man in her life. Her ego, he claimed, was immense, yet beneath that, she suffered from a deep inferiority complex. He went on to say that the girl was so unintelligent that the only thing she was remotely good at was playing golf. Furious, Dae-hai shouted, demanding to know if he truly wanted to die. Hoon-sang, calm but provoking, asked what was so wrong. She screamed at him, asking where he had heard such a story and swearing that she would kill him for it. He smirked and commented that she actually had a cute side, smugly adding that he had now backed her into a corner. From the way she spoke, he claimed he could tell exactly what kind of person she was and how she lived her life. He resumed laughing sarcastically, questioning where she had gotten her arrogant attitude from. He sneered, asking where the spoiled rich girl had gone, the one who used to cry to her father. To him, she was nothing more than a lost child. Then, he asked mockingly if she still planned on lashing out at him. In response, she asked if he was already exhausted. That only made him laugh again. After completing the workout, Hoon-sang finally fell asleep. However, early the next morning, Yuna stormed into his room, shouting at him. Groaning, he muttered that he hadn't gotten much sleep. But Yuna ignored his complaint and kept yelling, demanding whether he was getting up to go golfing or not. She reminded him there were only 10 minutes left until his tea time and questioned if she really had to wake him up. Feeling flustered, Hoon-sang hesitantly sat up and responded that he was already awake, just getting up now. Soon after, they both made their way to the golf course. When Hoon-sang arrived, he noticed that everyone else was already present and actively playing. Dae-hai appeared to be leading the session, receiving praise from the others for her impressive shot. Watching her from a distance, Hoon-sang found himself silently acknowledging how different she seemed from the previous day. He thought that maybe it wasn't a lie after all. She truly did seem like someone who had once been a professional golfer. Dae-hai approached Hoon-sang and asked whether it was his first time playing golf. He admitted that he had never tried it before. She gestured toward the direction of the red flag past the woods and told him that was the target hole. Then, handing him a pair of gloves, she held his hands and instructed him on the basics. She told him to place his left hand above his right, positioning his right pinky over his left index finger. She guided him to rotate his back and bend slightly at the waist, adjusting his legs into position. With calm firmness, she explained that he needed to think of his body as a rubber band, telling him that he couldn't just force his way through it. Meanwhile, Joe and the board director were seated behind them, observing. The director remarked that she must really like Hoon-sang, to which Joe responded with a chuckle. Joe admitted that what had happened the previous day had been quite a sight. He had never seen Dae-hai offer to teach someone like that. The director suggested they give the two some space. Joe replied that he might be open to the idea if it were someone high-ranking, but Director Hwang wasn't that person. He reminded Hwang of what he had said the previous night, that he wasn't a bad girl. Laughing awkwardly, Hwang responded that he had only been joking and advised Joe not to be so stiff. Still chuckling, he agreed that they should probably give the pair some room. It couldn't be helped. Back on the field, Dae-hai continued trying to teach Hoon-sang, but her frustration grew as he struggled. At one point, Hoon-sang wandered off toward the stream in search of the ball. Dae-hai called out, demanding to know why he was there. He shouted back that the ball had fallen in. Annoyed, she told him to get out of there. She extended her hand to help him out, but as she leaned forward, she accidentally slipped and fell into the stream as well. Hoon-sang burst into laughter, teasing her by pointing out that she had fallen too. Furious, she splashed water at him, calling him crazy. A nearby golf field helper, witnessing the scene, began dialing on his phone. He reported into the call that there was a problem with some customers. They were playing around in the water at hazard number 2. Even he couldn't help laughing at their antics. Later, as Hoon-sang and Dae-hai returned home, he teased her by saying that she was completely insane. Laughing, he added that the whole thing had actually been fun. At that point, he was carrying her on his back. Dae-hai grumbled that the only reason they didn't get into trouble was because she was a VIP. She scolded him, saying that he had made her look bad and that she had sprained her ankle because of him. Hoon-sang shot back that it was her own fault for dragging a complete beginner like him into this. He also said her expressions during the ordeal had been hilarious. As they both stepped into the room, they found it completely dark inside. Hoon-sang commented that it seemed no one was there. Dae-hai explained that Joe and Hwang had already returned to Seoul, while purple-haired Yuna had taken a room for herself. Hoon-sang attempted to touch her sprained ankle, only to start shouting in mock frustration that people always got hurt while working outside. He told her that her injury wasn't serious and begged her not to give him concrete boots, calling her princess. Laughing, she assured him that she had only been joking. He responded by asking what kind of joke it was that felt violent. He said that guys like him tended to take things seriously, and probably someone like her, a sheltered princess, wouldn't understand that. Still on her phone, Dae-hai apologized half-heartedly, sarcastically calling herself an unaware princess. He eyed her skeptically and asked whether she had really been joking. Then, noticing that she had suddenly pointed her phone camera toward him, he became visibly worried and asked what she was doing. As he tried to grab her phone, she yelled at him to stay away, reminding him that her ankle hurt. He looked at her and asked earnestly whether she was really that curious about him. After a moment of hesitation, she admitted softly that she had never met anyone like him. He replied that he couldn't tell whether she was simply honest or actually a fox. With a teasing smile, she asked what he would do if she were a fox. Would he run away? He answered that no, he wouldn't run. Instead, he said he'd exercise with her. Dae-hai looked at Hoon-sang with a mix of annoyance and disbelief, asking him what he was doing, reminding him that she was a patient and that her ankle still hurt. Hoon-sang couldn't help but laugh as he continued doing his stretches and exercises. He casually remarked that physical therapy was actually the best remedy for a sprained ankle. Then, with a teasing grin, he added that it was all her fault anyway. She had exhausted him that day, and on top of that, he had ended up being treated like a troublesome customer because of her antics. He complained playfully, saying she had really worn him out. Dae-hai, clearly irritated, snapped that he had no right to act however he pleased just because he thought something was funny. She reminded him that she wasn't just any ordinary girl who would obediently do whatever he asked. She wasn't someone he could push around so easily. With an amused expression, Hoon-sang simply looked at her and commented that she really was a terrible customer. He found himself watching her closely, quietly observing how she seemed to be genuinely enjoying the one-on-one hit session. As he continued to watch her, lost in thought, she suddenly turned to him and asked what he was staring at. Without hesitation, he told her that he was looking at her, and added that she looked even more beautiful with her hair down. Then, almost as if to soften the moment, he mentioned that a ponytail was pretty too. Despite the compliment, he noted her reaction and teasingly added that even when he tried to compliment her, she would simply brush it off and tell him not to. Meanwhile, Yuna was peeking discreetly into their room from the hallway. As she observed the interaction between them, a quiet thought formed in her mind. He was doing an incredible job even without her guidance. Though she was his manager, she couldn't help but acknowledge how well he was handling things on his own. Standing there in silence, she sighed inwardly, thinking to herself that she just wanted to go home. Daehye attempted to place her sprained ankle on the floor and, with a surprised expression, muttered that she couldn't believe it actually felt better. Hoon-sang, observing her, casually remarked that it hadn't been that serious in the first place. Still concerned, she cautioned that they couldn't be too sure, and insisted the bandages shouldn't be removed just yet. He advised her to take a shower, adding that he'd help her rewrap the bandages afterward. Hesitating slightly, she thanked him under her breath. He chuckled and teased her, remarking that she actually knew how to say thank you. Her response was one of mock irritation. She told him to make her some ramen while she went to shower. As she stepped into the bathroom, Hoon-sang stood up and headed to the kitchen, beginning to prepare the ramen. When she returned from her shower, she spotted him standing there and shouted for him not to mix the egg into the soup. He told her to just try it first because he was confident in his ramen-making skills. She rolled her eyes and sarcastically replied that she was sure of that. The two of them sat at the table together eating ramen. He served her a bowl, reminding her that he would rewrap her foot once they finished eating. She brushed it off with a casual whatever. He then asked if she wanted him to grab a beer, to which she scoffed and replied, asking what he meant by beer ramen called for soju. He brought out a bottle of soju, and the two of them began drinking together. He looked at her curiously and asked if she was really that rich. She seemed much more normal than he had expected. She retorted that just because she was rich didn't mean she couldn't enjoy ramen and soju. He acknowledged that it was possible, but said he would have expected spaghetti and wine from someone like her. With a wistful tone, she explained that she had spent her youth abroad, learning golf in the United States. She had been there for so long that she couldn't even stand the sight of Western food anymore. Even something as simple as spaghetti made her feel sick. It reminded her too much of that time in her life. He smiled and told her that from now on, he'd remember it was all about Korean food for her. She quickly shot back, asking who said she would be seeing him again. He confidently told her he believed she would end up contacting him. She raised an eyebrow and asked him where he had learned to flirt like that. He insisted that he wasn't flirting. She dismissed his response and asked whether he had ever dated anyone before. He admitted that he had been in a relationship with one girl for 5 years. That revelation surprised her, and she exclaimed in disbelief that he had dated one woman for 5 years. He looked confused and asked why she was reacting like that. She replied that in her world, they'd practically call that a marriage. He explained that in his world, it wasn't so simple. No money, no stable job, no house. How could someone like him marry and raise kids in that situation? He confessed that he had come to realize there was no point in raising a child only to have them end up like him. Then he added that although it was technically 5 years, they had probably spent no more than a month of actual time together. He asked if she understood what he meant, then turned the question back on her. How many relationships had she been in? She shrugged and said she couldn't remember exactly. The shortest one lasted 2 days and the longest a couple of months. He smiled and told her that meeting many people wasn't a bad thing. It helped to avoid mistakes in the future. She looked confused and asked what he meant by mistakes. He explained that people usually learn something after each breakup, like how they could have handled things better or what not to do with the next person they date. She seemed skeptical and questioned whether people really changed. She told him that all her relationships ended the same way ghosting was common, and most of the men she had dated left while she was still sleeping. With a laugh, he asked whether her comment about burying him in cement was related to that. She smirked and said that it was something she did just for fun. It was entertaining to see him get flustered. He shook his head and told her bluntly that she wasn't fit for marriage at all. She replied indifferently that she wasn't interested anyway. Later, they were both sitting in a room watching a movie together. Out of the blue, she thanked him. He looked over and asked what for. She told him it was for being there with her at that moment. Studying abroad had been lonely and difficult, and things hadn't changed even after returning. Once her professional golf rankings started to drop, people stopped caring about her. The paparazzi had once called her a beautiful golfer, but when she became less polished, they treated her as though she didn't exist. She admitted that, for the first time, she felt happy and free. She never truly liked golf to begin with. She had once wanted to tell her father that directly to his face, but she came to realize that he never really had expectations of her. The millions he had spent sending her abroad to study golf were, in her eyes, nothing more than an excuse to send his talentless daughter away, out of his sight. With tears beginning to fall, she confessed that she had become a woman who now taught golf to her brother's business partners, a life with no emotion and no love. She started sobbing. Without hesitation, Hoon-sang gently hugged her and told her to stop crying. He urged her to get some sleep and promised that he would hold her until she did. Through her tears, she asked if he meant it. He assured her that he did. She quietly thanked him once more and then fell asleep in his lap. Yuna arrived at the room shortly after. She saw Dae-hai sleeping peacefully with her head on Hoon-sang's lap. Observing them in silence, she made a mental note of what she was witnessing. Hoon-sang's phone vibrated. He glanced at it and read a message that made his stomach tighten. The message said that the president was demanding he leave the resort immediately. Sambo was working behind the scenes to block the press from releasing any photos of him and Dae-hai playing golf together. The directive was clear: leave now. A look of dread crossed his face as he read the message. Quietly, he rose from where he sat and followed Yuna out to her car. As he sat in the passenger seat, his heart felt heavy. He turned to her and asked, almost to himself, whether it was really okay to leave Dae-hai behind like that. Yuna calmly told him that it was perfectly fine to leave Dae-hai there. She explained that the building they had been in was under the security of Sambo personnel, and Dae-hai would most likely leave early in the morning. There was no reason to worry about her. She then added that he had done a great job. Hoon-sang nodded and returned the compliment, telling her she had done well too. The following morning, Dae-hai left the building with her face fully covered to avoid recognition. As soon as she got into her car, her bodyguard turned to her and asked if she was feeling all right. She looked unusually tired. She curtly told him to shut up and keep quiet. He complied with a soft yes. As the car began moving, she started scrolling through her phone and came across a selfie of herself and Hoon-sang from the previous night. She stared at it, surprised, wondering when he had taken it. She sighed in frustration and muttered that it was annoying he had left without even saying goodbye. Still, she couldn't help but think that he was incredibly cute. A mischievous smile played on her lips as she thought to herself that he was definitely trying to make her call him first. She mentally warned him to watch out. She wouldn't let him win that easily. Meanwhile, at the Sambo Company headquarters, Vice President Lee Ji-chong, who was also Dae-hai's older brother, was seated in his office. His manager entered the room and asked if he had seen the photos. Ji-chong turned around with a puzzled expression and asked which photos he was referring to. The manager approached and showed him a series of images. As Ji-chong looked through them, he saw several pictures of Dae-hai and Hoon-sang together. He narrowed his eyes and said that the man looked oddly familiar. After a moment of silence, he instructed the manager to run a full background check on the young man. Despite the sense of familiarity, he couldn't quite place who Hoon-sang was, and it bothered him. Yuna looked at him and asked if he finally understood the kind of woman he was dealing with. He appeared puzzled, so she didn't elaborate further. Instead, she simply said that it was time for them to head to the store. Meanwhile, Jo was sprinting down the hallway toward a hotel room. The moment she reached the door, she flung it open and began shouting, demanding to know where the managers were and why her calls were being ignored. Her frustration was clear. Then, Noticing someone inside the room, she paused and asked sharply what an employee was doing there. The employee quickly explained that the president had arranged a VIP table and had brought in all of their best workers. He added that the manager had instructed him to inform her of Miss O's presence as well. Joe's eyes widened in surprise upon hearing that Miss O was already there. Turning to the employee, Joe gave strict orders. She said that a muscular man would be arriving soon and that no one was to be allowed in after him. The employee nodded in understanding. She further instructed him to evacuate all the other employees as soon as possible and to close up the shop afterward. When he hesitated and asked for reassurance, wondering aloud if this was really okay, she firmly told him to do exactly as instructed. She added that once Yuna arrived, he should simply inform her that Miss O was present and Yuna would understand the rest. Joe then opened another door and stepped into a separate room, where she found Miss O already there. Joe paused, clearly caught off guard, and admitted that she thought there were still a few days left until Miss O's scheduled reservation. She gently pointed out that it would have been nice to receive a heads-up. Miss O, who was in the middle of her training session, didn't look up. With an air of indifference, she said she would come whenever she pleased and didn't need anyone's permission to do so. She then turned her attention to Joe, questioning whether her employees actually brought in any money, noting that they all looked so frail she could probably knock them down with a couple of hits. With a pointed tone, she added that she had heard Joe had hired someone promising, and asked where that person was. As Yuna and Hoon-sang arrived outside the hotel, an employee was already waiting for them. The moment they pulled up, the employee rushed toward the car and demanded to know why Yuna hadn't been answering any of his calls. Yuna, maintaining her composure, reminded him that she only answered calls from the boss. The employee, visibly anxious, informed her that Miss O was already there. Yuna's expression changed in an instant, clearly surprised by the news. He added that the situation upstairs was in complete chaos, with everyone on high alert. His eyes then shifted to Hoon-sang, and he asked Yuna if the man beside her was the rumored ace. Without entertaining the question, Yuna told him to stop yapping and instructed him to park the car. She then turned to Hoon-sang, asking him to get out of the vehicle. Once inside the hotel, Yuna led Hoon-sang toward the elevator and up to one of the restricted floors. As soon as the elevator doors opened and they stepped out, Hoon-sang glanced around, clearly confused by what he saw. He asked what kind of place this was. Yuna explained that the floor he had seen last time was above this one and served as the women's club reserved for exclusive hotel guests. This floor, however, was the real host bar meant for entertaining high-profile customers. She warned him not to make eye contact with anyone and simply to follow her. He nodded and agreed. As they entered, Hoon-sang looked around in amazement and quietly remarked that this was what the place actually looked like. But Yuna pulled him aside, her tone urgent, telling him they didn't have time to waste. She said that whatever they had planned for the day would have to be postponed. Instead, she instructed him to focus completely on the customer he was about to meet. She added that she would trust him to handle it well, and that he needed to pay close attention to everything that happened. On their way to the room, they encountered a man sitting in the hallway. Hoon-sang politely asked the man to move aside. The man, mishearing him, snapped and demanded to know what he had just said. Hoon-sang calmly repeated himself, and the man, realizing the misunderstanding, quickly apologized. Eventually, they reached Miss O's room. Inside, Miss O was berating Joe harshly, treating her with thinly veiled contempt. When Miss O noticed Hoon-sang walk in, she immediately turned to Yuna and asked if that was the man she had been referring to. Her eyes scanned him critically. With a smirk, she commented that he had a good body, just the kind she liked. She then declared that since he was finally there, he could begin training her for her session. Miss O walked over to Joe, her expression laced with a knowing smirk, and remarked that working with male employees must be exhausting. She added that the situation brought back some memories, perhaps from the time when Joe had been more active in the scene. Without waiting for a response, Miss O instructed Joe to sit in the corner, saying she needed to punish someone for arriving late. Turning her attention to Hoon-sang, she looked him over and asked for his name. He responded calmly, introducing himself as Hoon-sang. Miss O clicked her tongue in irritation and said that because of his tardiness, she had wasted her time, and even Yuna, his boss, had ended up in trouble because of him. She asked him how he planned to make amends for that. Hussein stood firmly and replied that he would do anything she asked. That was all he could say. She raised an eyebrow and muttered that he was still so green. Then she commanded him to step closer, to let his hair down, and to tilt his head. As he followed her instructions, she studied his face with sharp, critical eyes. She murmured that his thick eyebrows and long lashes were quite striking. He quietly thanked her. Without warning, she suddenly slapped him across the face. She announced coolly that it would be $1,000 for every blow and asked what he thought about that deal. Joe couldn't remain silent any longer. She stood up and shouted that this was a place of business and asked what would happen if someone called the police. Miss O, clearly unfazed, waved off the concern. She replied that it was fine. He had already said it was